A great escape, facing down demons, a dance, and death. All in this episode of What the F Does This Even Mean? Blood Meridian. Welcome to What the F Does This Even Mean? Blood Meridian. I'm your host, Amy from Amy Gets Lit. This is the 7th episode in my series on Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy and the last episode going over the text of this novel. Don't forget, if you like this content, please subscribe. I'll be doing these deep dives with a new book approximately once a month. I'm working on the new one right now, and you won't want to miss it. In episode 6, I talked about chapters 16, 17, 18, and 19. This episode, I will be covering the final 4 chapters, 20, 21, 22, and chapter 23, with the short epilogue thrown in. And I cannot wait for you to hear my thoughts on that dang epilogue. I will be giving an overview of each chapter as things change for the kid, Tobin, Tobin, and the judge. I won't be covering everything in these chapters, but highlighting and discussing parts that I find interesting or significant. In the last episode, Glanton and his gang set up the Yumas, took control of the ferry, headed up for supplies, and the Yumas got their revenge. Some of Glanton's gang ended up in jail, others died, and chapter 19 closes with the judge running off for safety. Tobin and the kid fought a running engagement upriver through the shore, bracken with arrows clattering through the cane all about them. The kid lives, Tobin lives, but not without injury, at least for the kid. He's been shot in the leg by an arrow, and the shaft of the arrow is rubbing against his bone. They are being pursued by the Yumas. They spend the night sleeping and are up at dawn to keep moving forward. They take the wagon trails, and the kid finds the discarded wagon part he uses for a crutch. He tells Tobin to go on without him twice, but Tobin refuses. In chapter 5, we start out following the kid with the injured Sproul as they travel throughout the desert after the filibuster was attacked by the Apaches. Sproul told the kid to leave him, but the kid refused. Now we have the kid and Tobin traveling in the desert after being attacked by the Yumas. This time it's the kid that's injured and tells his traveling companion to go on without him. He has no water, he has no horse, he only has the clothes on his back. The kid has come full circle. He is in no better shape now than he was before. Joining Captain White did not change his fate like he was promised. He gained absolutely nothing by joining Glanton's gang. In fact, he's now worse off. The Yumas continue to pursue the kid and Tobin. The kid and Tobin stop, and the kid fires off at the Yumas, killing one. They continue their trek and land in Alamo Mucho, where they find Tobin. Tobin just appearing at the well reminds me of the judge just appearing in the desert by the lone tree when Glanton's gang met him for the first time. And all three jump into the well where the kid and Tobin quench their thirst before the Yumas start raining arrows down on them. The kid shoots back with Tobin's help and encouragement and kills enough of the Yumas that they retreat to camp for the night. In the morning, the Yumas are gone. So maybe the kid did learn something from Glanton's gang. He learned how to kill. They see 2 figures in the distance approaching. They are down to 1 gun and low on ammunition. Ex-priest Tobin whistles down to the figures approaching, and they lay in wait with the pistol in their hand. Those who travel in desert places do indeed meet with creatures surpassing all description. The watchers at the wall rose the better to witness these arrivals. The imbecile was fairly loping along to keep the pace. The judge on his head wore a wig of dried river mud from which protruded bits of straw and grass, and tied upon the imbecile's head was a rag of fur with the blackened blood side out. The judge carried in one hand a small canvas satchel, and he was bestrapped with meat like some medieval penitent. He hove up at the diggings and nodded them a good morning, and he and the idiot slid down the bank and knelt to drink. So now we know that the judge and the man from the cage did indeed make their escape. The judge negotiates with Tobin for his hat. There are a few things here in this exchange that are interesting, at least to me. At one point before Tobin sells his hat, the judge said to Tobin some phrase in Latin. We aren't told what it is that he said, only that it's in Latin. What is interesting to me also is who is alive and who is not. We have the kid, Tobin, and Tobin. All 3 of these men exhibited throughout the story that they had not lost their humanity, but are also capable of violence. On the other hand, the men in Glanton's gang that we didn't see this goodness in, for lack of a better word, we do not see in this scene. They're all dead, with the exception of the judge. The other is the act of selling. The judge has separated the kid, Tobin, and Tobin physically, and it shifts their dynamic too, as if Tobin betrayed a loyalty to them. The judge invites the kid and Tobin down to join him for meat and water while inquiring about weapons in their possession. "We've just the one pistol, Holden." "We," said the judge. "The lad here." The kid had risen to his feet again. The ex-priest stood by him. The judge on the floor of the well likewise rose, and he adjusted his hat and gripped the valise under his arm like some immense and naked barrister whom the country had crazed. "Weigh your counsel, priest," he said. "We are all here together. Yonder sun is like the eye of God, and we will cook impartially upon his great Cilius griddle, I assure you." "I'm no priest, and I've no counsel," said Tobin. "The lad is a free agent." The judge smiled. "Quite so," he said. He looked at Tobin and smiled up at the ex-priest again. "What then?" he said. "Are we to drink at these holes, turn about like rival bands of apes?" The line in the sand is drawn now, with Tobin and the kid on one side and the judge on the other. And Tobin? Well... The kid hands his gun to Tobin to hang on to, showing his trust in Tobin, and went into the well to fill the canteens, keeping his eye on the judge, more watching of the judge as he's done throughout this whole book. The kid asked Tobin, who has been, for lack of a better word, a pretty good friend to the kid, if he's coming with them. Tobin said he's a wanted man in California, and he's run out of country here. He spat and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and he looked at Tobin. "It ain't country you run out of," he said. Then he made his way across the sink and up the bank. Well, Tobin has made up his mind then, hasn't he? The kid has to feel really betrayed by Tobin's decision. Do you think it's a decision that Tobin made willfully, or do you think that the judge, whatever the judge is, somehow influenced Tobin's decision? I'm trying to figure that one out myself. $500, he said, powder and ball included. The ex-priest was at the kid's side. "Do him," he hissed. The kid took the pistol, but the ex-priest clung to his arm, whispering, and when the kid pulled away, he spoke out loud. Such was his fear. "You'll get no second chance, lad. Do it. He is naked. He's unarmed. God's blood, do you think you'll best him any other way? Do it, lad. Do it for the love of God. Do it, or I swear your life is forfeit." This is quite out of character for Tobin, but we do know that Tobin has not trusted and has feared the judge throughout the book. He's not wrong, though. This is the most vulnerable we've seen the judge in the story. Why doesn't the kid shoot him? Is it because he doesn't feel like his back is against the wall or threatened? Because we've seen him act violent in those situations. And if he doesn't feel threatened, what the hell is wrong with him? It's the judge. He's seen what the judge is capable of. We just witnessed him take out the Yumas. Both Tobin and Tobin comment on how he's a great shot. And why does Tobin believe if the kid doesn't kill him now, he's forfeiting his life? Do you have a feeling that Tobin has some sort of idea or knows a lot more than what he's admitted? The next day, as Tobin and the kid continue their journey through the desert, they run into David Brown. Remember, in the last episode, Brown had been arrested and earned his release through bribery, only to kill the soldier that had set him free. Brown asks if they had fallen out with Glanton and the gang. They tell him about what happened at the ferry. They tell him Tobin and the judge are out there somewhere, and Brown confirms the judge is unarmed and asks again if they're certain that Glanton's dead. I think that Brown is concerned here about Glanton because Brown has deserted the gang. He panics a bit, seeing people from the outfit. Remember what happened to those that deserted in Mexico? They were tracked down and killed. The following day, they come upon the ruins of a caravan before they reach Carrizo Creek. The kid squats down to drink when he's shot at. He looks to see the judge on a horse, dressed in David Brown and Tobin's clothes, with a rifle in his hand. The scene is a longer one, and I recommend reading it multiple times. The kid hides, draws his pistol, and exchanged missed shots with the judge. Tobin tells the kid to shoot the man from the cage before they're separated again, and Tobin runs for the desert. The judge tries to trick the kid out of hiding, but it doesn't work. Time passes. Eventually, the kid does come out, and he sees Tobin with a makeshift cross in his hand. He heard the wind coming off the desert, and he heard his own breathing. When he raised his head to look out, he saw the ex-priest stumbling among the bones and holding aloft a cross he'd fashioned out of the shins of a ram, and he lashed them together with strips of hide, and he was holding that thing before him like some mad dowser in the bleak of desert, and calling out in a tongue both alien and extinct. I feel like there's a lot of vulnerability in this scene, married to fear and desperation. I interpret the scene as Tobin feeling that nothing can save them now, but some sort of divine intervention. I think of scenes I've seen of exorcisms done in South America where the priest held the cross and ordered the devil to leave the person it had been possessing. What's intriguing here is the phrasing in the last line, calling out in a tongue both alien and extinct. As someone who formerly went under religious instruction of the Jesuits, Tobin knows Latin. Earlier in the chapter, when the judge spoke in Latin while trying to secure the deal with Tobin for his hat, the narrator tells us he speaks in Latin. Could the language being alien and extinct mean that the evil that is in the judge is as old as time? Could it be a hint that the judge is not the devil, as many believe, but something different altogether, like a djinn? The kid watches as Tobin is shot by the judge in the neck. He fires at the judge, misses, and the judge disappears. Tobin tells the kid his only hope is to slow the judge down by shooting his horses, which the kid does. He goes down to wash his leg and get a drink and hears the judge nearby. The judge is demanding the kid give up his pistol for killing his horse. It doesn't matter that the judge shot at them first or that the kid was acting essentially in self-defense. The judge is mad. He tries manipulating the kid again, telling him he knows Tobin put him up to it, and he would take that into consideration. The kid finds Tobin's tracks and blood, and together they hide. The judge continues to call out to them, citing legal cases. Then he started talking of quote-unquote other things. Then he spoke of other things. The ex-priest leaned to the kid. "Don't listen," he said. "I ain't listening." "Stop your ears. Stop yours." The priest cupped his hands over his ears and looked at the kid. His eyes were bright from blood loss, and he was possessed by a great earnestness. "Do it," he whispered. "Do you think he speaks to me?" I want to know what these other things the judge is speaking are. They're for the kid's benefit. So what could they be, and why is their narrator not sharing that with us? They travel that night and the next day. They sleep and wake up to the judge and the man from the cage still pursuing them. The kid looked at Tobin, but the ex-priest sat without expression. He was drawn and wretched looking, and the approaching traveler seemed to evoke in him no recognition. He raised his head slightly, and he spoke without looking at the kid. "Go on," he said. "Save yourself." The kid took the water bottle from the shelves and unstoppered it and drank and handed it across. The ex-priest drank and they sat watching, and then they rose and set out again. This is another instance where the kid will not leave a man behind, even if it would save himself. The kid and Tobin are in rough shape, y'all. They are both wounded, both hungry. They've run out of water, and now they're both thirsty too. So they trek through the sand of the desert. The kid realizes that the wind is helping cover up their tracks. In our story so far, the environment and elements have been cruel. Here, nature offers a kindness because the judge is still on their trail. The kid tells Tobin that they need to hide, but Tobin says there's nowhere to hide from the judge. They dig out a shelter under some mule bones, waiting for the judge to pass. It doesn't take long for him to pass. He has the man from the cage on a leather leash. He's also carrying a parasol made of rotten hides and bone. This kind of reminds me of some of the fancy women I see walking around New Orleans in the summer when the heat is suffocating. A parasol in one hand, the leash of their puppy in the other. It's kind of a funny sort of comparison, but it's kind of what I visualize with the judge here. After the judge passes, he tells the kid he will never get a chance like this again to kill the judge. Tobin does. They come out of hiding to see the judge returning and quickly hide again. The judge knows that they're there somewhere. So the judge addresses the countryside. "The priest has led you to this, boy. I know you would not hide. I know, too, that you've not the heart of a common assassin. I've passed before your gun sights twice this hour and will pass a third time. Why not show yourself?" "No assassin," called the judge, "and no partisan either. There's a flawed piece in the fabric of your heart. Do you think I could not know? You alone reserved in your soul some corner of clemency for the heathen." For me, this confirms that the kid was different than the rest of Glatton's gang, and is why the judge was always studying him. He kept parts of his humanity, his mercy, his conscience. He didn't submit completely to violence. And because he didn't submit completely, the judge sees him as a weak link, a traitor, a disappointment, broken and flawed, having not lived up to his potential. After being scolded for having mercy in his heart for the Apaches that Glanton's gang hunted, it is members of the Diegueno tribe that find the kid and Tobin and save their lives. The Dieguenos take the two to their camp in San Felipe and care for them. The kid and Tobin tell them what had happened to them with the Yumas, and the Dieguenos respond by saying, "Son soy malos," they are very bad. I think it's really important to point out that by having the Diaguenos tribe take care of the kid and Tobin and then denounce the Yumas as very bad, McCarthy is pointing out how different each indigenous tribe was from one another and that there were bad feelings and fighting between different tribes. After they leave the Diaguenos, the kid and Tobin travel to Warner's ranch where they rest and revitalize themselves in a hot sulfur spring there. No one is around, so it seems like maybe they've lost the judge. They climb a trail up into the mountains and then down low into the hills. The next day they reach San Diego. Tobin goes searching for a dock. The kid seeks out the ocean where, in a hat tip to Moby Dick, one of McCarthy's favorite novels, and a definite influence in this book, the kid finds whales. Going back through the streets past the yellow window lights and barking dogs, he encountered a detachment of soldiers, but they took him for an older man of the dark and passed on. He entered a tavern and sat in a darkened corner watching the groups of men at the tables. No one asked him what he wanted in that place. He seemed to be waiting for someone to come for him, and after a while 4 soldiers entered and arrested him. They didn't even ask him his name. The kid, having lived with his guilt of what has happened for long enough, spills his guts about everything they've been through. The soldiers believe he has lost his mind. He wakes up one morning in his cell to find the judge standing at his cell and looking down on him. The kid asked about Tobin. The judge said that he told them that Tobin had gone mad and the kid was entirely responsible for what happened at the ferry. The judge told the kid he is going to be hung because of it. Now we have the judge coming full circle. When we first meet the judge, he is lying about Reverend Green in the revival tent. Now he's lying about the kid. In lying about the kid, though, the judge absolves himself from his own wrongdoing while keeping secret who he really is. A lot happens in this conversation between the judge and the kid. I'm not going to go over all of it, but the part that appealed to me most. "You're the one that's crazy," said the kid. The judge smiled. "No," he said, "it was never me. But why lurk there in the shadows? Come here where we can talk, you and me." The kid stood against the far wall, hardly more than a shadow himself. "Come up," said the judge. "Come up, for I've yet more to tell you." He looked down the hallway. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I'll speak softly. It's not for the world's ears, but for yours only. Let me see you. Don't you know that I have loved you like a son?" He reached through the bars. "Come here," he said. "Let me touch you." Remember in earlier videos when I pointed out the parallels and connections between the kid, his father, and the judge? See? It's such a creepy scene. The judge watched him through the bars. He shook his head. "What joins men together," he said, "is not sharing of bread, but the sharing of enemies. But if I were your enemy, with whom would you have shared me? With whom? The priest? Where is he now? Look at me. Our animosities were formed and waiting before we two ever met. Yet even so, you could have changed it all." The judge now scolds the kid again for not embracing the violence that Glanton's gang dealt out, for judging the gang for their behavior, for not fully submitting. One interesting thing here is when the judge says our animosities were formed and waiting before ever we two met. Is that the classic battle of good versus evil? What do you think about that line? That night, the kid has a long conversation with the corporal telling him about where the gold and silver from the ferry was hidden. 2 days later, he was released. His first order of business was finding a doctor to see to his leg. A surgeon agrees. The next day, the kid shows up drunk. Him and the surgeon get into a confrontation, but eventually the kid goes under the knife. While under, the kid has a dream about the judge having no origin. A week later, he is healthy enough to hobble around town, and he goes searching for Tobin. No one has seen him. We will never really know if the judge was being honest about Tobin or not. Maybe he did go mad. Maybe he suffered a worse fate. In June of that same year, he witnesses a public hanging in Los Angeles. Later that night, he returns to the site of the hanging to discover the dead men were Tobin and David Brown. While wandering around town, he saw a man slobbering at the window. He knocks at the door, discovering, thankfully perhaps, it's not Holden's man from the cage. Before he leaves town with his last $2, he buys David Brown's necklace of ears. He leaves town the next morning for work. He's employed for several months before he just up and leaves his job to wander around. Although he's illiterate, he carries a Bible around with him, perhaps a symbol of the kid turning his life around. He witnesses violence in his travels, watches his life around him changes, but he wasn't a participant, neither in violence or in life really. He never did see Tobin again, though he did inquire. But he did hear rumors about the judge everywhere he went. When he is 28, he is hired to escort a family back east with 5 other men. 7 days in, he abandons them and travels to a countryside he's not seen before. He comes across a procession. There are musicians, a man led by a rope, a man shouldering a wooden cross, and a person dressed as a skeleton. The procession represents some elements of his time with Glatton's gang. The next day, he comes across the procession. They are hacked and butchered among the stones. He sees an old woman sitting by herself, and he goes to help her, only to discover that she has long since been dead, and she turns to dust. And now we have reached the last chapter in Blood Meridian. In the late winter of 1878, he was on the plains of North Texas. The kid is now the man, around the age of 45. He is camping out in the plains when he sees another campfire. He approaches, and it's an old buffalo hunter. They share tobacco and swap stories. The buffalo hunter speaks of the violence he and his crew handed out to buffalo, driving them to extinction. The buffalo hunter settles in and said to the kid, who is now the man, "I wonder if there's any other worlds like this," he said, "or if this is the only one." During this time, violence has been everywhere, against man and against beast. It's like the buffalo hunter's experience mirrors the experience of Glatton's gang, including sitting around the fire and wondering if there's other life out there. Remember when Glatton's gang were camped for the night around the fire and were talking about the 2 moons and Mars? The man rides through the countryside for 3 days and comes across a camp of bone pickers. That night, 5 young bone pickers approach him as he's setting up camp. The 5 boys learn that the man is going to Griffin, Texas, and tell him about how many prostitutes are there. There is a conversation about whiskey, too. Remember the hermit from chapter 2 and what he said would be the downfall of man? Those are 2 of the things. The man shows the kid his necklace of human ears that had belonged to David Brown. He has carried it with him all these years. One of the young bone pickers, named Elrod, age 15, insinuates the man is a liar. Elrod is a bit confrontational with the man, making his friends a bit nervous. The man looked up warily. "You ain't calling me a liar, are you, son?" "I ain't ye, son." "How old are you?" "He's 15. You hush your damn mouth." He turned to the man. "He don't speak for me," he said. "He done spoke. I was 15 years old when I was first shot. I ain't never been shot. You ain't 16 yet neither. You aim to shoot me? I aim to try to keep from it." When this exchange between Elrod and the man happens, I can't help but think that the man is confronting a younger version of himself here, given Elrod's nature and his age. Elrod can't leave well enough alone, and the man knows it, so he's ready for Elrod when he comes in the middle of the night to shoot him, and the man shoots Elrod instead. The next day his friends go to gather his body, remarking they knew that they would be burying Elrod in the prairie, and hand Elrod's gun to his 12-year-old brother, now orphaned by the times with no family in the world. The next day he rides into Griffin. The first thing he does is he finds a saloon. "Speaker forever," said the barman. "A whiskey." "A whiskey it is." He set up a glass and uncorked a bottle and poured perhaps half a gill and took the coin. He stood looking at the whiskey. Then he took his hat off and placed it on the bar and took up the glass and drank it very deliberately and set the empty glass down again. He wiped his mouth and turned around and placed his elbows on the bar behind him. Watching him from across the layered smoke and the yellow light was the judge. The judge is back and he looks unchanged despite the years that have passed. 1 minute the judge is there, the next minute he's gone. A disagreement breaks out between the showman and the man stands up and kills the dancing bear, leaving the little girl that played the barrel organ for the bear in tears. The judge approaches the kid that's now the man. A lot happens here between the judge and the man. This scene between the judge and the kid that is now the man is important. Read it again, read it once more. Because this scene is 5 pages long, I'm only going to pick parts I find most interesting or important and then discuss them. "It's all over," she said. "It's all over." "Do you believe it's all over, son?" He turned. The judge was standing at the bar looking down at him. He smiled. He removed his hat. The great pale dome of his skull shone like an enormous phosphorescent egg in the lamplight. "The last of the true, the last of the true. I'd say they're all gone under now saving me and thee. Would you not?" The judge watched him. "Was it always your idea," he said, "that if you did not speak, you would not be recognized? You seen me." The judge ignored this. "I recognized you when I first saw you, and yet you were a disappointment to me. Then and now. Even so, at the last I find you here with me." "I ain't with you." The judge raised his bald brow. "Not?" he said. He looked about him in a puzzled and artful way, and he was a passable thespian. "I never come here hunting you." "What then?" said the judge. He poured the tumbler full once more, and he took a drink himself from the bottle, and he wiped his mouth and turned to regard the room. This is an orchestration for an event. for a dance in fact. The participants will be apprised of their roles at the proper time. For now it is enough that they have arrived. As the dance is the thing for which we are concerned and contains complete within itself its own arrangement and history and finale, there is no necessity that the dancers contain these things within themselves as well. In any event, the history of all is not the history of each, nor indeed the sum of those histories, and none here can finally comprehend the reason for his presence, for he has no way of knowing even in what the event consists. In fact, were he to know, he might well absent himself, and you can see that he cannot be any part of the plan if the plan there be. I tell you this, as war becomes dishonored and its nobility called into question, those honorable men who recognize the sanctity of blood will become excluded from the dance, which is the warrior's right, and thereby will the dance become a false dance and the dancers false dancers. And yet there will be one there always who is a true dancer, and can you guess who that might be? You ain't nothing. You speak truer than you know, but I will tell you, only that man who has offered up himself entire to the blood of war, who has been to the floor of this pit and seen horror in the round and learned at last that it speaks to his inmost heart, only that man can dance. The judge acknowledges to the kid who is now the man that the only two left from that time long ago is the man and the judge. He asks the man if he's there for the dance, which is answered only by silence from the kid, and the judge seems to resent this. When he mentioned the kid being silent, I think back to the conversation between Tobin and the kid around the fire in chapter 10. It's one of the first conversations where the judge is the topic of conversation between the two of them. And in that conversation, Tobin had said to the kid that God talks to those who are silent. And the kid had said, does God talk to the judge? Now, the other two quotes deal with the judge's obsession with fate and with war and with ritual, meaning the dance. The judge is obsessed with fate. Perhaps he's even able to bend fate at his will. I'm not sure. He believes everyone there is there for the dance, and everyone that is there is seeking out their fate. He then says war has become dishonored, and the dancers are false dancers, basically telling the kid that he's a false dude. And soon there will only be one true dancer, implying himself, and perhaps offering us a little foreshadowing. The man leaves the judge and finds a prostitute. After they get their business done, he doesn't want to leave her room, and she has to force him out. When he goes down the stairs and back to the saloon, people are dancing. The man goes to the jacks, or the outhouse. The judge was seated upon the closet. He was naked, and he rose up smiling and gathered him in his arms against his immense and terrible flesh and shot the wooden bar latch home behind him. The kid that became the man is no more. We never witness what the judge does to the children that went missing throughout the book, and we do not witness how the man meets his end. But by the reaction to the men who peek inside the outhouse, we know it's nasty. We do see, though, the judge is naked, and he gathers the man in his arms. Many people believe this suggests that Judge Holden sexually assaults the kid before murdering him. After all, dance is essentially a ritual, and throughout time, there are a lot of rituals dealing with sex. But I think it's deeper than that. I think that what the judge does here is he embraces him like a father. To me, it brings the relationship between the judge and the kid / the man full circle. We've had a lot of hints paralleling the kid's father, the kid, and the judge. The judge literally says he would have loved the kid like a son and tells the kid he's disappointed in him, just like a father would. And they are dancing, the board floor slamming under the jackboots and the fiddlers grinning hideously over their canted pieces. Towering over them all is the judge, and he is naked dancing, his small feet lively and quick and now in double time and bowing to the ladies, huge and pale and hairless like an enormous infant. He never sleeps, he says. He says he'll never die. He bows to the fiddler and sashays backwards and throws back his head and laughs deep in his throat, and he is a great favorite, the judge. He wafts his hat, and the lunar dome of his skull passes palely under the lamps, and he swings about and takes possession of one of the fiddles, and he pirouettes and makes a pass, 2 passes, dancing and fiddling at once. His feet are light and nimble. He never sleeps. He says that he will never die. He dances in light and in shadow, and he is a great favorite. He never sleeps, the judge. He is dancing, dancing. He says that he will never die. Now, I'm not saying I'm 100% sold on this, but what if, when the judge has undergone his ritual and is naked, which his ritual is murder, not dancing, no one can see him. In this last part, no one's really interacting with him. I mean, there's things that he's their favorite, but greed and passion and power and lust, those are all favorite things without being an actual person. If the judge is a metaphor for those things, perhaps I'm onto something here. I'm not sure. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section down below. That last passage, just something's up. A man is in the desert making holes in the ground. When I first read this, I picture a post hole digger. He travels across the plain, quote, striking the fire out of the rock which God has put there, unquote. There are other men wandering around, picking up bones, moving mechanically from hole to hole. The epilogue ends with, he strikes fire in the hole and draws out his steel. Then they all move on again. In discussions I've had on this book, the most common theory is that the man digging the post is transforming the terrain of the area, either to build fencing to signify ownership of land, or railway to signify the expansion west, demonstrating time moving forward and things changing. While I agree that laying railroad tracks is a reasonable interpretation, by 1878, a lot of the rail was already built. And what leads me away from simply thinking this is a message about industrialization is that industrialization had begun already and was referenced in the text in chapter 2 by the hermit when he talks about machines to make machines. There is some phrasing to me that, just like in Sesame Street, one thing is not like the other, that stands apart in this epilogue, and that is the phrase, they move haltingly in the light like mechanisms, whose movements are monitored with escapement and palate so that they appear restrained by prudence or reflectiveness which has no inner reality. So, I did what I do, and I did some research on escapement and palate mechanisms. I discovered two things. These are parts to watches. They are also parts to typewriters. In fact, I found this typewriter manual from 1945. Without the escapement, there are no letters appearing on the page. There's no functioning typewriter. So I think that this epilogue is about casting a light on history, with the palette and escapement being used in watches, through storytelling, with the palette and escapement being used in typewriters. And this is essentially McCarthy breaking the fourth wall and talking about lesser known events of history that have been buried and exposing them to an audience. I feel that this theory of mine is further evidenced by the phrasing, they appear restrained by prudence or reflectiveness which has no inner reality. To me, that summarizes the process of writing and the stories we've previously have been told, but we know now, after historical record has been exposed, are simply not true. And a fun little side note, let's not forget that Cormac McCarthy wrote this novel on a typewriter. In fact, the Olivetti Lettera 32 that he wrote this on, he used since 1963, and he picked it up for $50 at a pawn shop. When the typewriter died in 2009, he auctioned it off and it was bought for $250,000. And then he replaced it. But he didn't replace it with the PC, he replaced it with another typewriter. This novel looks at a time in our history that is often not talked about. When it is talked about, forgive me for the phrasing, but it's often whitewashed. You don't hear how brutal Americans were towards indigenous people. We were taught that indigenous people were savages. Plenty of books, television shows, westerns, and other movies reinforce that. Hell, even Little House on the Prairie. It doesn't matter that European colonists turned Americans did most of the scalping. Scalping, historically we've been taught, was a Native American thing. At least that's what we've been taught. And that is why books like this, as horrible as the violence can seem, if you don't have the stomach for it, and as ugly as the characters treat one another, are so important. They do a service. They remind us who we really are. And friends, there you have it. We have finished Blood Meridian. I have been asked often why I chose Blood Meridian as the first book I tackled as a deep dive. I think that Blood Meridian is often a misunderstood book. It is often looked upon as a dude's book, which I think does a huge disservice to the reader of Blood Meridian and Cormac McCarthy as an author. I've had a lot of really smart conversations with other readers of this book since starting this series through DMs, emails, and comment sections. To write this book and them off as dude lit bros is simply ridiculous and kinda says a lot more about you than them. There is a lot of violence in it, and that seems to be the reputation that this book has. Seriously, say anything about this book and the violence gets mentioned immediately. And to be fair, reading Blood Meridian is like experiencing a gauzy nightmare. But history is made up of a lot of nightmares, and the line between the good guys and the bad guys is often blurred. While I enjoy and appreciate McCarthy's writing style, including rhythm to his writing, word choice, and overall storytelling, what I love most is its complexity and layers, not just in its writing, but in its history of the story it's telling, and the characters and their actions and the references and nuances made throughout. I love this book because even though it was published in 1984 and primarily takes place in the 1840s and 1850s, it stands the test of time, and I can draw modern day connections. I love this book because it's open to interpretation in a way that not all books are. It's a mystery to be solved, and not everyone is going to come to the same conclusion. And that's okay, because that leads to discussions. And I think we live in a time where we need to be having more discussions, not less. For me, my conclusion on the judge is that he isn't a man. He isn't the god of war. He isn't Satan. He isn't a djinn. That is something that's changed for me this time reading it. The judge, to me, is a combination of all those things and none of those things. I think he's a mixture of all the evil, questionable, or scary deities, demigods, or creatures in every religion, every culture, perhaps even the darker sides of our humanity taken to the extreme, that are controlled by greed, power, and pride. We all have the capacity to kill the spirit of others to reach our goal. We all have the capacity to justify violence. We all have the capacity to eat the souls of other people so we endure, so we succeed, so we're okay. And isn't that what the bad guys in any mythology stand for? The things we shouldn't be, but the things we're capable of being. And the kid is all of us, just trying to do the best that he can. Sometimes he's going to make mistakes, sometimes he's going to fail. He has the ability to turn his life around. He has the ability to change. He has choice. He can harm others, he can hurt others, or he can stay in his lane. He can show mercy, or he can be ruthless. I really think that's what this book is about. When I took on this project, I had two goals. I wanted this series to be a love letter to Cormac McCarthy and Blood Meridian, because I love this book so much. I also wanted to create something that would introduce Blood Meridian to those who've never read it, but still offer something for those like me who've read it several times. I wanted to make it accessible because I think it tells an important story. I think I was successful in that. At least I hope I was. Thank you for all of your time. I appreciate you.